That the highest king would welcome me. I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the sun sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died
college. We were on a road trip. I was a member of the Indiana Wesleyan University Chorale. We were on our spring break trip, nearing the end of the week of performing and traveling all over the southeastern United States. And we were on our way back to Indiana. We were scheduled to travel from Brooksville, Florida to Kannapolis, North Carolina, a journey of about 570 miles. And because of the distance and all the things we had to do, we were scheduled to leave at 5:30 in the morning. But two members overslept, and so we didn't get on the road until much later than our conductor wanted, and he was not happy. And so the day just got off on the wrong foot. And I decided that I would go ahead and drive, being one of the leaders in the chorale, and I was driving a 12-passenger van with 11 or 12 passengers in it, and a trailer that had all of our equipment and a lot of our luggage in the back. And so we've been driving long enough, it's early enough in the morning that everybody in the van except for me and the assistant conductor everyone else was asleep. And we're driving through this sleepy town in central Florida, and we're about an hour 15 minutes into our trip. And as I was driving through this town, it's not been light for very long, I just out of the corner of my eye, my peripheral vision, I see this bicycle coming down the sidewalk. And I wasn't too concerned. I had a green light, and he was pretty far away. And so I didn't think too much of it. We got to the intersection, had just entered the intersection, and what I hear, wham! And I about had a heart attack because all I could think was that guy on that bike had slammed into the side of our trailer, or worse, in between the van and the trailer. I hit the brakes. And Jeff, the assistant conductor, was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, did that guy just hit us? He said, "No, I just opened the door and spit up my gum and slammed the door." And we had a good laugh, and we kept moving on. Everyone is awake now, though, because of all the noise and all the talking and all that. About 5 miles out of town, we are cruising at highway speed, just getting settled back into our trip, and wham! But this time, I can feel a huge rush of air, and I can hear glass clinking all over the floor. And I stop the van as quickly as I can, as safely as I can, to find out what happened. And so you're probably wondering, what did happen? Well, it turns out a freshman alto named Rachel was laying with her head down on her friend's lap in a seat and had put her feet up on the window of the side door, and she shifted her weight and blew the window out. Now, relieved that it was not worse than it is, but kind of stressed about what the conductor's going to think, how we're going to continue driving the next 500 miles with a broken window. We stop, we clean out the glass the best we can, and we get moving to catch up to the bus we are following. Now, at this point, no one is talking. No one is saying anything. And everyone feels a bit anxious. I know we're all a little concerned about getting where we need to go and what is our conductor going to think. But mostly we felt bad for Rachel. I mean, Rachel was this really sweet girl. She was kind to everyone. She was super, super nice. And as I'm driving, I would catch glimpses of her in the rearview mirror. And I didn't know what to say, and I don't think anybody else did. And nobody wanted to make her feel worse. She already felt bad enough. And as I see, she had brown eyes, big brown eyes, and they were just filled with tears that hadn't yet fallen down her cheeks. And so, not wanting to make anything worse, I didn't want to say anything, I decided to turn on the radio. And I pressed the scan button, and the first station it hit started playing Frankie Valli's and the Four Seasons Big Girls Don't Cry. And for just a brief second, everybody stopped and looked at Rachel, and then we all busted out laughing. And Rachel starts laughing, and she's crying, and she's got the sobbing and the laughing and the crying, and we're all laughing so hard we nearly run the van off the side of the road. It was such a funny time. And I just want to stop there and say, have you ever noticed that in the moments when we don't know what to say or what to do, when we don't want to say the wrong thing, and so we say nothing. When we just need a break from the pressure and the stress, God often allows just the right thing to give us that break. And I think that's what it was. As that song came on, all the pressure, all the stress, all the anxiety just came out of that moment. And so we pulled ourselves together and we went on our way, and we had just such a light, fun time for that whole time. Now we still had this problem of the window being broken, and so we caught up to the bus and kind of showed them, hey, we're missing a window. And so the next time we stopped at a McDonald's and let everybody out to get breakfast. And we looked around, but it was, a small town Florida, and there was not a glass place open on a Saturday. And so we stopped at a hardware store and got some heavy plastic and a bunch of duct tape, and we closed it up as best we could. So we thought the fix was in. So we got back to the restaurant. Everybody was ready to go. We got going. Jeff and I didn't get to eat anything, so that was kind of a problem. But anyway, we got moving and went on our way. Now, before we even got all the way out of town, our tape job didn't do very well. The wind caught it and blew it in and came off, so we pulled off on the side of the road, and it probably took us 5, 6, 7 minutes to get something that would actually hold. And we got going again, and now I have anxiety again because I know a turn is coming, but I don't have a map, and I do not have the directions where we're going next. And so I need to catch up to the bus. Now, as I said, I'm driving a 12-passenger van loaded with luggage, and it's got a governor on it, so it can't go that fast anyway. But I hurry as much as I can, and on the way out of town, I notice something in my side mirrors. I see red and blue flashing lights. You know what it is. It's law enforcement. It crossed my mind to make a run for it, but with the van and the trailer, and it was a Florida Highway Patrol Mustang, I figured I didn't have much of a chance. So I pulled over to the shoulder and stopped, and the officer made the obligatory walk up to the side of the vehicle. He asked for my driver's license and the vehicle registration, the insurance card, and after what seemed like about 15 minutes, he came back up and he asked me if I would come to the back of the trailer. I had been pulled over a couple times before, and I thought this was kind of unusual. And so Jeff and I walked to the back of the trailer, and he said, well, son, I'm going to have to write you a citation. I clocked you going 72 and a 55. And so here is the ticket. And I hadn't said anything up until that point, but I decided I would take a chance. I'd say, sir, it would really help if there's any way you could cut me a break on this. I'd explain the situation. We're trying to catch up to the bus. We had the window blowout. I'm just a young guy. I made a mistake here. I'm really sorry about that. Ironically, I think 72 is the fastest the van would go. And so I hope that this whole story would help him be convinced to give me a break. And I stopped there just for a minute. Have you ever found yourself having received grace or a blessing, but because it wasn't everything you had asked for or wanted, you felt maybe a little disappointed or shortchanged, and maybe a bit ungrateful because it wasn't all it could have been, at least in your way of thinking? This was probably one of those moments. So the Florida Highway Patrolman listened to what I had to say, and then he offered me this choice. He said I could go ahead and accept the ticket as written and be on my way. Or he could tear it up. And he could write a new one from the point at which he had clocked me earlier going 60 and 35. There are times when we're unaware that the grace we've received is already much more than we deserve. And I totally understood where he was coming from. And I said, yes, sir, I understand, sir. Thank you, sir. I'll keep that in mind, sir. I will watch my speed, sir. You have a good day, sir. And so we continued on our journey. It was about 10:30 in the morning, and we settled in what was sure to be a long, boring journey through northern Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. Now, after lunch, it was about 3 in the afternoon. I'm continuing to drive, and I look up and I see in front of us some very unusual movement on the highway. And then I see brake lights coming on, and there is smoke and dust and tires screeching and all the things you associate with some type of pileup. And I can see a car spin, and then it flips and it lands on its roof, and it is still spinning as it lands on its roof. That's how close we were to it. It was in front of us, but behind the bus. And so we get stopped. We're not hit. We're not involved in the accident. We think we ought to go lend aid. So several of us jump out and we go up to the front. And as we are getting up there, there is this sound coming from out of the car. It's not from the car. It is from the driver. It is a woman who is climbing out of the broken window on the driver's side. And she is saying something. She's swearing. I'll say it mildly. She is swearing like a sailor, but maybe not a sailor, maybe like a full ship of sailors, and not just a frigate or a destroyer. I'm talking like a cruiser or a battleship. I mean, she is letting go with the big guns. Now, I knew all the words that she was saying. I'd heard them before. Honestly, I'd probably said most of them at some point in my life. But I had never heard them in those combinations. And I had never heard them with that much anger or fear or adrenaline or whatever it was. It seemed like it went on for 2 or 3 minutes. She just was berserk. She wasn't attacking anyone. She wasn't even directing them anyone. She was just letting go with all the profanity you could ever imagine. And then she just broke down weeping. And after, in hindsight, it seems like actually a pretty reasonable response compared to what she had just gone through. You know, the truth is, it was amazing. No one was hurt. No one was even injured in that whole pileup involving several vehicles. We did what we could to provide some comfort and aid. The first responders got there. They were able to clear the road, and we got on through, and we got on our way. Now, you might say, why did I include that in my story? Does this have some important part? I think it does in a minute. But why the focus on the salty language? I mean, I'm not really kind of a legalistic kind of guy. I did grow up in a conservative home and a conservative church in a conservative era, more so than now. You know, I believe words are important. In our home, we couldn't say bad words. We couldn't say the D word or the H word or the F word. We couldn't say that. And I'm talking about dang, heck, and fart. I mean, we just didn't say that kind of stuff, much less the other ones you were probably thinking of. I don't think that profanity is something that is an issue of our salvation or whether or not we can stand before God at the judgment. I think it has something to do with our discipleship and how closely we're following after God, but that's another story. But anyway, that's where I grew up, and all of this profanity was washing over me, and it really stood out to me that day. By the way, this is another part of the story where you might want to dog your page or put your thumb in. Not because we've entered a dream sequence, but for another reason. Well, lo and behold, we arrived at our destination in Kannapolis, North Carolina. It was well after dark because it was spring and we were running behind. We unloaded our luggage and set up our equipment in the church where we would be performing at the next day's service. Then we gathered as a group to match up with our host families who would keep us for the evening, and found that they had put my roommate and I with 2 other guys and 2 girls from the corral all in the same house. This was a little unusual to have that many of us go to one host family, but a lot of times it was really fun to do that. And we arrived at their home, and it was this cool lodge-style cabin kind of on the side of a mountain. And it was a sportsman's dream. And you walk in, and there's rustic beams all over, and there are trophy mounts of animals all around the entire main room. There's deer, there's elk, there's moose, there's turkeys, I think there's bear, there's probably big cats. I mean, it was amazing, but it was overwhelming. It didn't seem like a home. The owner knew that I was interested in some of this stuff, and so he said, hey, come over here for a minute. And he took me over to the freezer, and he handed me this plastic bag. He said, go ahead and take it out. So I reached in and took it out, And it was something that was about this big around, about the size of a big platter. It was a frozen rattlesnake that he planned to have mounted at some time in the future, all coiled up. It was probably a 6 or 7 foot long rattlesnake. And I just thought, well, this is kind of cool. It's kind of weird to have a rattlesnake in your freezer. But anyway, they offered us pizza and snacks. But by now I was super tired. And so I ate a piece of pizza. I don't remember what it was. And I asked if it was okay if I could just head up and go to bed. And so the host took all of us upstairs to show us where we would be sleeping. Now, I stop here and I say, I can say pretty confidently that my attitude and my actions throughout that day had been almost exemplary. I had shown patience and self-control and kindness and all of those things, all those qualities the Bible talks about us expressing in Christ-like character. I had been doing that. I've been godly in my thoughts. I've been Christ-like in my actions. There was probably the possible exception of my unsuccessful attempt to justify driving 25 miles an hour over the speed limit. But with that one little chink in my armor, I had done really well. And beyond the inner workings of my heart and the thoughts of my mind, I had been the kind of spiritual leader that I had been aspiring to be. I was on campus now in my 3rd year, and I was an emerging leader on that campus. I was part of a very large college ministry and one of the student leaders of it. I would speak on a regular basis to a congregation that was far larger than the average American congregation. And I was in my 2nd year serving as one of 2 chaplains, one male, one female, for the chorale. And so I had this regular opportunity to provide spiritual direction and counsel to people in the chorale. They were kind of like one of my congregations. And the guys in my group that night were all younger than me and had all been looking up to me in many ways on campus and in the chorale. Well, when the host showed us our sleeping arrangements, I must confess to at least a hint of ingratitude seeping into my attitude. I mean, it had been a long day, and I just wanted to sleep, and I just wanted to rest, and I just wanted a break. And they had placed all four of us guys in a room that maybe should have only had 1 or 2. There was a twin or full-size bed. I don't know, it seemed tiny. And there were 2 spots on the floor on either side of the bed. And so we made the decision that 2 of us would sleep on the bed and 1 would sleep on either side of the bed. And I didn't say anything. I hope it didn't show on my face. I was exhausted, but I was not feeling very grateful. I went ahead and got ready for bed while the rest of the guys headed back downstairs. And I bet I was asleep within seconds of my head hitting the pillow. I was zonked out. Sorry, I lost my page there. Now, the next morning, I was first up. I felt like I'd slept pretty well. It was a good relief from the day before. I took a shower, I got dressed, and I went into the room to make sure the guys were awake, and they were all awake. They were all up, and they were talking. But as soon as I walked into the room, they stopped. You know that. When you walk into a room and all of a sudden there's this awkward silence and like, what's up? And they looked at me with a look of kind of incredulity and communicated, what do you mean, what's up? Now I knew there was something in my spiritual leadership that was being called into question. I'm like, I'm confused, guys. I have no idea what you guys are talking about. What's going on? And so here's what happened. This is kind of where I said you need to put your thumb in the story. So I went to bed and I went to sleep. And they went downstairs and they goofed around for a while and they ate some more snacks and they came up. And they got ready for bed and they got in bed. And after they'd gotten in bed, but before they'd gone to sleep, I started to mumble in my sleep. They don't know this. They think that I'm just talking to them, that I'm irritated with them. And I mumble something and they say, what? And I mumble something again and they say, what did you say? And then fairly loudly and clear as a bell, I sit up and I say something along the lines of, how many effing people are in this effing bed anyway? They told me this, and I was mortified. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, please tell me I said farting. Please tell me I said Farfignugan. Please, no, that is what you said. And in a conversation where my credibility was on the line, we had to have a discussion for a while in which I said, you know what, I talk in my sleep sometimes. And it must have been hearing the woman on the highway. And I had that in my mind, and I was kind of frustrated that we were having to sleep in the same bed together and all that. And we finally got to the point where they realized I was just having this crazy dream and talking in my sleep because I don't remember any of it. And eventually, we got to a good place. We laughed about it. I'm like, you're not going to talk to anybody else about this? And they're like, yeah, not a chance. And I had a hard time living that one down. You know, I think about that day, and I think about, wow, you know, what a day full of just overstimulation. I mean, there had been too many things, and I was experiencing some sensory overload, and I was tired, and I was exhausted. I was under pressure. But I noticed that little attitude of ingratitude brought out kind of an embarrassing reveal. And it made me remember, you know what, my ingratitude, my language wasn't the problem. I mean, it was offensive language, but it wasn't really the problem, but my ingratitude was, and my grumbling was a problem. You're probably relieved to know that I don't remember anything else happening during that trip. We got back to our campus and everything was great after that. But there are two pretty important life lessons that I still remember to this day, beyond the ones we've already talked about. They may help you too. And the one is that it is so important that we guard our hearts and our minds. You know, we guard what comes in. We guard what takes residence. You know, when I first started envisioning this message, I wasn't thinking about telling the story. I was thinking about talking about food. I was thinking about the things we do to enhance the flavor and texture of what we eat. You know, we don't just take it and eat it the way it is or just boil it. We want to make it taste good. You know, putting ketchup on a hot dog doesn't change the hot dog. It's just that we eat it together and we eat them at the same time. It just lays on top and we get them as two separate things, but they're combined. But that's different than, say, marinating a chicken breast in lemon and salt and some other seasonings, or smoking cheese or smoking fish, or putting homemade rub on a rack of baby back ribs overnight, slow cooking them over the barbecue at about 215 degrees for about 6 to 8 hours, and with some hickory smoke rolling over them and a homemade barbecue wash. Okay, you get the picture. Going to make everybody hungry and you're going to take off. But what you understand is this, is when you do those things, it affects not just what's on top, it affects the whole piece of meat or cheese or whatever it's infused, it's a marinade, it's going inside. I think about what Jesus said in Luke 6, when he says in verse 45, a good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. And an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. See, what you say flows from what is in your heart. Now, thankfully, what was in my heart when I said that night when I was not grateful about the place I was sleeping, that wasn't in my heart permanently. It was just an exposure long term. But it illustrates what's really important, that when things are allowed to go deep inside, eventually they're going to come out. When King Solomon was writing to his son, he was giving a whole bunch of advice. And in Proverbs 4, he says, "My child, listen to what I say. Listen carefully to my words. Don't lose sight of them." He says, let them penetrate deep into your heart. Let them soak in. Let them infuse your heart, for they bring life to those who find them and healing to their whole body. And so he says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Ironically or coincidentally, in this message, the very next thing he says is, avoid all perverse talk. Stay away from corrupt speech. And I think sometimes we make too big a deal over what people say. Sometimes we don't make enough of it. What we choose to say as a way of seeping into how we think and how we act. So how do I guard what is seasoning my mind? The first thing I think of is to control what you have control over. There's some things you don't have control over. You can't unhear something. You can't unsee something. And there are ways to deal with that. But what you read, the talk radio you listen to, the news that you consume, the social media that you are perusing on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis in some cases, the shows and the movies that you watch, the people you admire or despise, all of those things have an impact. And so maybe a question for us to consider is what influences do I need to move away from today? Because they are seasoning my heart. They are marinating in my spirit. We guard our hearts by placing limits, even if that means withdrawing. Sometimes we need to withdraw from some people, some influences. It doesn't mean we abandon them, but we reduce their influence. Even Jesus withdrew from the crowds a lot. Now, I know he went to go and spend time with the Father, which is another way in which we guard our heart, spending more time with God. But some of it, maybe it was, I need a break from all these people. Their ingratitude, their cursing of one another, their fighting, their greed, all of that kind of stuff. Maybe he just needed to pull back and go, that's not who I am either. And one other way we guard is we need to then find people and places and things that fill our soul with good. It has the effect of not only filling us with good, but pushing out the not good. So one important lesson is to guard our hearts. And secondly, is to remember this, is that everybody takes their turn in the pressure cooker. A pressure cooker is another way to make a major change to food, especially meat, infusing it with flavor and breaking down the compounds in the meat to make it tenderized. You can make a great piece of meat in a pressure cooker. You can also make it as tough as leather if you're not careful. Everyone takes their turn in the pressure cooker, where what we have allowed or cultivated in our hearts to be revealed as we are being tested. In the book of James, when he is speaking to those who would listen, he says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. So let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Mature and complete, not lacking anything. That's God's goal for us. He wants us to be marinating in things that are good, the things of his word, the things of life living in the body. And we're going to be put under pressure because that's part of how we are being developed. And so when you feel like the pressure cooker has gotten the best of you, what do? Well, own it. Just own it. Just admit it. You know what? I didn't handle that pressure very well. And then ask for forgiveness where it's needed. I did that of the guys, even though I wasn't probably responsible for what had gone into my mind. I said, I'm really sorry that happened, guys, and I'm sorry that it kind of freaked you out and thought maybe I wasn't who I've been saying I was. But ask for forgiveness where it's needed. You know what? Sometimes you need to adjust the recipe of what's coming in. If you don't like something one time, try it a different way and adjust what's coming into your life. Adjust what you're listening to. We're coming up on the really hot and heavy political season. We need to be careful about what we hear, but we also be careful about what we're, the perspectives that we're taking in, especially when we're only doing it from one direction. God wants us to be balanced in our thinking so that we can be wise. And thank God for the work he is doing in you, because he is doing a work. You can survive and you can and thrive in the pressure cooker when you let God do the work. Let me pray for you today. God, thank you for your word. And thank you for the experiences that you allow us to have in life that educate us, that inform us. But maybe more so the ones that form us, the things that shape us. A lot of times they're things that aren't that fun. We wouldn't necessarily choose to go through them, but they shape us and make us into the image of your Son. And so, God, I pray that that's what we would be today as a result of not just hearing this message, but going in making the one or two changes we might need to make today to guard our hearts and to live in the pressure cooker. In your name we pray. Amen.